Welcome. My name is Berit Herström. You are listening to the Dry Edge TPT lecture, and this is number 3, which concerns edge mechanisms. The edge mechanisms will contain a part about chemical edge mechanisms and the choice of process gases. And then there will be a part on fundamental edge reactions and the role of the ions. And I'll talk a little bit about passivation mechanisms. The last part here, the bus process, will be in a separate lecture, and which will be done by my colleague Jonas Mikael Lindhardt, and he has a nice presentation about that. But first we'll go to the chemical edge mechanisms and the choice of process gases. Let's take a look at the edge mechanisms and what that requires of the process gas. The edge mechanisms are actually a very complicated matter, and all details are not fully understood yet. So therefore I will just present a simplified version that helps understanding what is going on and also helps us to choose the right gases and the right process parameters. Here we see a sample surface material consisting of these blue atoms, and up here we have the process gas, which also consists of maybe several kind of atoms. And the first thing that needs to take place is that this process gas should dissociate into radicals. And these radicals, which are the reactive species, must diffuse to the surface. And then the reactive species must adsorb on the surface, and then a reaction takes place to form a reaction product. So you see a reaction product is being formed here. Then the reaction product must desorb from the surface, and the product must also be able to diffuse into the plasma to be pumped away. And what does this require of the process gas? Well, first of all, this reaction product must be volatile at the processing temperature and pressure. And that means it needs to be able to evaporate from the surface so we can pump it out. And that means that the reaction product must consist of atoms from the sample and atoms from the gas. So the gas here must contain some atoms that, together with the atoms from the sample, makes a edge product that is volatile so it can be pumped away. So we need to take a look at what kind of volatile products we could create. But first let's take a look at what materials we are interested in etching. Here you see the periodic table. We are not interested in etching all elements, but if we take a look at the interesting elements, then of course silicon is one of the materials we etch the most. Also silicon oxides and nitrides, and we will also have some germanium etching. Then we have the 3,5 materials that some of our users are etching, for example indium phosphide or gallium arsenide. Then recently some of our users have started etching boron nitride or graphene. Then we also have a lot of metals that people are interested in etching. The ones that has been shown now are some metals that has been inside the clean room for a long time. And then there are some other ones that has been coming within the past years. And it turns out that the halogens over here form volatile edge products with many of these elements, but not all of them. But if here you see a table over some different edge products. For example, you can see silicon can form edge products with all three halogens, fluorine, chlorine, and bromine. The column you see here is the boiling point at 1 atmosphere. And as you know, we are etching at a much lower pressure. But we don't have table values for the pressure where we are processing. Therefore, we need to use what we can get. And for most of the edge products, we can get it at 1 atmosphere. And then we just have to remember that this number would be much lower if it was at in the millitorr to torr range where we are etching. I can find for some of the products, I can find the temperature required to get a vapor pressure of 1 torr, which is still higher than what we normally, this is a higher pressure than what we process at. But at least we know that if these values here are lower than 20 degrees, then we are sure that the product will be volatile during the etch, and even a little bit higher will work fine. So all these here will be volatile at the processing pressure. One product that's good to take a look at is this indium chlorine. If we are etching indium in chlorine chemistry, then we have a number here that says 175 degrees at 5 millitorr. So that means when we are etching indium in a chlorine chemistry, we need to run it at an elevated temperature around 175 degrees. And that's a good indicator of where the boiling point at 1 atmosphere has to be. So it definitely has to be lower than this, and if it's this high, we have to run the process at an elevated temperature. But that means, for example, if you're looking at etching aluminum in a chlorine chemistry, you will see that these values here are low enough, so this will be volatile at the processing pressure. Whereas, for example, if you're trying to etch aluminum in a fluorine chemistry, then the values are too high and it will not form a volatile product. The product may be sputtered off, but if that happens, then it will just redeposit either on the sample, probably most of it will be on your sample, but also some of the aluminum fluoride will end up somewhere else in the chamber. So this is of course something that we don't want. So please be aware that you are etching with a process gas that can form these volatile products. If not, we will have contamination of the chamber, and this may be very bad for the user coming after you. Yes, it's also good to know that some of the other metals like silver, for example, will not form volatile products with none of the halogens. Same goes for nickel and also gold. So these are not allowed to be etched in our plasma etchers. So by now we know that the halogens are very good for etching because they form reactive radicals and they form volatile products with semiconductors and with some of the metals. Here is a list of different gases that contains these halogens. There's a long list of gases containing fluorine, and we only have these 4 here. And there's a shorter list containing chlorine and bromine. These are the ones that I could find, and we only have these 3 here. Then we have oxygen, which is good for etching polymers and, for example, for stripping resists. There are also a list of other gases that can assist and these are being used, for example, to help passivation and to get better sidewall control, for example, or things like that. This gas here, the methane, is actually an etching gas. This can etch indium at room temperature, but it's a slow process and it's a very dirty process, so we don't use it that much. Here's an example or question for you to think about. You have to select gases for etching chromium. And if this is the list of gases you have available, then you have to find out what gases to use for chromium etching. I'll show you here the list of some etch products from the list before. And here you have the boiling point at atmosphere and the temperature required to get a vapor pressure of 1 torr. So what should you do first? Well, you should take a look at the etch products that are containing chromium. So that's these three here. And then you have to figure out if any of these will be volatile at the processing pressure. Well, if you take from the top here, we see that chromium fluorine has a high boiling point, so this will not be volatile. If we look at chromium chlorine, then we see it also has a high boiling point, so that will also not be volatile. But then we have this chromium oxychlorine, and here the boiling point is quite low, and if you look at the temperature required to get a vapor pressure of 1 torr, then it is below the 20 degrees, so we are quite sure that this one here will be volatile at the processing pressure. And that means that we will need both oxygen and chlorine. So from the list over here, I would pick oxygen and chlorine to etch chromium. And it's important to have both, or else you know that you will get a non-volatile product, and that may end up somewhere else in the chamber and contaminate it and make it bad for the next user. Now we are done with the etch mechanisms and the choice of process gases. So the next I'll talk about is fundamental etch reactions and the role of the ions. Here are the 4 fundamental etch mechanisms that you need to know. The first one is a physical sputtering process. Here ions are bombarding your substrate and sputtering off non-volatile product. This will leave redeposition both on the sidewalls and on all other surfaces, on your sample and in the chamber. This makes the profile here being a little bit tilted. Then there's a second reaction mechanism, which is the chemical etching. Here radicals will diffuse down on the surface and they will form a volatile product that will be pumped away. In this case, you will have etching not only downwards but also underneath the mask. So this is an isotropic etching. In this case, the etching happens completely without bombardment of ions. Then there's this third mechanism called ion-assisted energetic. In this case, it's also the reactive species that has to diffuse to the surface to react and create volatile products. But in this case, it needs the ion bombardment to be able to form the product or to make it leave the surface. So it has to be assisted by the ions, and therefore you only have etching where the ions are hitting, and therefore you can get a very nice vertical profile here and get an anisotropic etching. Then there's the fourth mechanism, which is called ion-assisted passivation, also the passivation mechanism. In this case, the etch is also being done with reactive species, and in this case they can actually react without the ion bombardment, but then there will be some other species that will form some kind of passivation layer all over, and then the ions are needed to remove the passivation layer in the bottom so the edge can continue. We will come back in more details on this mechanism here. I found this graph here that shows the edge rate as a function of the energy of the impinging ions. And this shows the different mechanisms and how they are affected by the energy of the ions. For the first mechanism, the physical sputtering, you can see that if the ion energy is 0, you won't get any etching, and then it will increase linearly with the ion energy. The second mechanism, the chemical etching, is the same as etching by reticles. In this case, the etch rate from this mechanism is independent on the ion energy, and that's of course because no ions are needed for this etching. The last one covers both ion-assisted energetic and the ion-assisted passivation mechanisms, and in this case you also have no etching if you have no at a 0 ion energy, and then it will increase with the energy at least until some point, then it may flatten out here. But this also shows what is very typically that the physical etching is mainly a small part of the etching, and then the contributions from the chemical etching and the ion-assisted etching is normally larger. The ratio between them, of course, depends on the energy, but also on other things like the chemistry, what kind of material are you etching, and things like that. But if you want to have anisotropic etching with vertical sidewalls, then you need to make sure that this part here is the dominating part. Or else you will get either isotropic etching or this etching here where you have deposition on the sidewalls. I would like to give you some examples on when these mechanisms are dominating. And if we take the physical sputtering, then when you are etching gold, silver, platinum, and nickel, and some other materials that does not form any volatile products with the edge gases, then you will only have physical sputtering. Then for the chemical sputtering, there are two good examples here. There's silicon etching in fluorine gas. Silicon turns into silicon tetrafluoride very easily, and that can etch chemically without any ion bombardment. The same goes for etching aluminum in a chlorine chemistry. That very easily forms aluminum tetrachloride. And then there are many examples on this one, but two that you should know are silicon etching in chlorine and bromine chemistry. They need the ion assist to be able to form these volatile products. It's also the case when you're etching, for example, silicon oxide, then you also need the ion assist even when etching with a fluorine. The last mechanism here, we'll come back to that. Now I would like to tell you a little bit about the role of the ions. Again, I have made a drawing here of a surface you would like to etch, and the blue dots indicating the surface atoms. The red dots are indicating the reactive species that can form volatile products. Now I've added some gray atoms on the surface, and these are just illustrating any other material that would absorb on the surface, but that won't form volatile products. In the case where these atoms or molecules here will cover the whole surface, then you won't have any etching. So therefore, one of the roles of the ions is to bombard the surface to bombard away these non-reactive and non-volatile species from the surface. And this is to leave an open space for the reactive species to get access to the surface. Another role of the ions is to bombard the surface to break bonds and activate the reaction. So in most cases, what it needs to do is to break the bonds in the substrate so the reactive species can get access to the atoms and form the reactive, the volatile product. A third thing, or third role for the ions is to bombard the surface to help the reaction product desorb from the surface so it can be pumped out. I would like to show you here some table values of bonding energies, and that can tell you something about how strong the bonds are in different materials, and thereby how much energy you have to put into the ions. A reference value could be the silicon-silicon bonds. They are at 327 kilojoules per mole. And what you should notice is that, for example, silicon-oxygen bonds, which are in silicon oxide, these are much stronger than the silicon-silicon bonds, and therefore you normally need more energetic ions to break these bonds and to have a good etching rate in silicon oxide. This goes for many of the oxides, that these have very strong bonds, and also some of the nitrides have at least stronger bonds than the silicon-silicon bonds. Many of the metals have quite weak bonds.
Let's take a closer look at the role of the ions when etching silicon. Silicon forms volatile compounds with both fluorine, chlorine, and bromine. With fluorine, silicon tetrafluoride is formed easily and dissolves easily without ion bombardment, so it chemically etches very easily. It's actually an exothermic process. Even without ion bombardment, fluorine radicals easily react with silicon, forming silicon tetrafluoride, and therefore it is an almost isotropic process. With chlorine and bromine it's different. Silicon tetrachloride and silicon tetrabromide do not form and dissolve easily without ion bombardment, so those processes need an ion bombardment to etch, and the etch rate is slower than when etching with fluorine, even at high ion energies. So question: how do you think this will influence the anisotropy of the chlorine etch compared to the fluorine etch? Well, since the etching with fluorine is an isotropic etch, and the etching profile will be isotropic and not anisotropic. It can only get anisotropic if it's mixed with a fluorocarbon containing gas, so a fluorocarbon passivation layer is formed. With chlorine, the etch mechanism is ion-assisted energetic. It only etches where the ions are hitting and is therefore anisotropic by nature.
This leads us to the passivation mechanism. Because etching silicon with fluorine is something that we would like to keep doing, because it's etching very fast, and often we need to etch very deep in silicon, so it's good to have a gas that etches very fast in silicon. So to avoid getting isotropic etching, we need this passivation mechanism. You remember that the passivation mechanism, you needed the radical that will etch chemically, and then you need some other species in the GARS to form some kind of deposition layer that you'll remove with the irons, and in that way create an opening for the etching to continue. There are different ways of making this passivation layer. Often we etch silicon with SF6, and this will create this silicon tetrafluorine. If we add oxygen to the SF6, then we will also create some silicon oxyfluorine, which is a solid. And this solid will then form everywhere where we have opened up to the silicon, so it's both in the bottom and on the side walls. And then when we bombard the surface with the ions, it will remove the layer on the horizontal plane, but leave the side walls covered. And in that way we can etch down and covering the side walls. When we are bombarding the bottom here, we will also bombard the masking material, in this case a resist, and that means the resist will not last so long, so there is a limit to how deep we can etch using this method here. Therefore, we also have another way to do it. We can passivate with fluorocarbon. We can use these fluorocarbon gases here, which contains both carbon and fluor. And with these gases, we can create a fluorocarbon polymer layer that will cover the whole surface, both the masking material and the silicon. And then when we bombard the surface, we will again remove the layers on the horizontal planes to open up to the silicon so we can keep etching. But this layer also protects the mask, so when during the bombardment it will only remove the fluorocarbon layer, or maybe a little bit more. There are two mechanisms to do this. There's a continuous process where we etch with a fluorocarbon gas and have a quite high ion bombardment at the same time. And then there's another mechanism called the cyclic process, where the fluorocarbon polymer is deposited first. Then an ion bombardment will remove the polymer in the horizontal planes, and then there will be a step with, for example, SF6 etching the silicon. And then it goes back and makes another polymer layer, another ion bombardment, and then yet another etch step. This is called the Bosch process, and the Bosch process will be the topic for the next video. So you can continue by watching this, or you can continue by watching first the etch characteristic video that will explain some of the basic characteristics we see in dry etching, and these characteristics are also being used, or some of them at least, in the Bosch process video. So if it's completely new to you, it could be a good idea to watch this first. But if you are good with the characteristics, you can continue with the Bosch process.